Hi, everyone. So, belief number 2, coaching the whole person. So far we talked about how we believe in the potential to change. And to bring out that potential, we need an ideal learning environment that coaches the whole person. So, a good question that can come up here is, well, how do you bring out that potential that we talked about, that potential to change? I think it starts with coaching the whole person. And coaching the whole person consists of 3 different things: the physical, the emotional, and the intellectual. So the physical is the body, and then we have the emotional and the intellectual, the mind. Prior to belief number 2, we talked about the potential to change, and we talked about both the mind and the body's potential to change. Well, in terms of coaching, I think it's imperative that we address the emotional aspect. Now, let's bring in the S.A.I.D principle for a second. The S.A.I.D principle basically says specific adaptations to imposed demands. So specific adaptations will occur in the organism given imposed demands from the environment. So our responsibility as a coach is to impose demands so that we can create adaptations in the person. And we know that pretty well, hopefully, from a physical standpoint. But what about applying the S.A.I.D principle to the emotional aspect of the human? So acknowledging the fact that adaptation to a new stimulus takes time and consistency. And according to behavior change psychology, it takes about 66 days to form a new habit, which means as coaches, we have to convince somebody to either do something or not do something over and over and over again for more than 2 months in order to create a long-term habit or a potential long-term habit. And hopefully that's our goals: independence and longevity. I don't think we can do that if we don't at least acknowledge the emotional challenges that the person has to change. Because change is a scary thing. If you, again, listen to behavior change psychologists speak, they will tell you that the first reflexive response to someone proposing change is fear, withdrawal, defensiveness. We have to know how to combat that. And I think acknowledging the emotional challenges and the psychological barriers to change is huge in terms of coaching someone for health, fitness, and longevity. So we have to address their fears. We have to address any level of hope or lack thereof, their morale, their challenges that they currently face, at least acknowledging it and knowing of them. For example, if the client just had a baby, or if the client just moved from one state to another and bought a new home, if they just started a new job, we have to appreciate that all those other changes going on will affect their ability to commit to some level of process with us from a health and fitness standpoint. And a lot of times when we talk about the emotional or psychological aspects of a human or of a client, people will say, well, I'm a trainer, I'm a physical therapist, I'm a chiropractor, like I'm not a psychotherapist. And of course we're not. But I found through practice, we don't have to go down the rabbit hole of psychology or of their childhood upbringing necessarily. I found that simply acknowledging their frustrations, and instead of jumping in and giving them advice, asking them good, thoughtful questions, and then listening to their responses to those questions to glean from them their challenges and the things that they like and they don't like. Listening to that and incorporating that into the plan of action, I found has been the minimum effective dose in terms of leveraging someone to change, or acknowledging the fact that they may not be ready to change right now given all the other things going on in their life, and that's okay too. I think many times our incessant desire to help can sometimes be a burden that allows us not to help many times. So the emotional aspect is huge. So now let's put that on the side for a second and let's take a look at pain science. And let's take a look at what pain science has to teach us about the emotional aspect of the human. So way back when we were first investigating pain and trying to better understand it, neuroscientists wanted to figure out what areas of the brain were responsible for processing pain. Because in their mind, they thought, well, if we could just identify those areas, we can get a good neurosurgeon, get in there, surgically remove that sucker, and all of our pain problems would be over. Well, pain science is a lot more complicated than that, and the functional MRIs that they used to scan people's brains while pain was being inflicted upon them. So, for example, they were getting pricked on their finger, and then the fMRIs was showing the scientists, okay, well, what areas of the brain are active during this experience? They found that there wasn't just one area responsible for processing pain. Multiple areas light up in the brain during a painful experience. So, for example, the amygdala, where fear is conditioned, the anterior cingulate gyrus and the prefrontal cortex, where we have our concentration and our focus tends to live, the premotor cortex, where motor planning seems to be orchestrated, and many more. I think there was like 7 to 9 different areas that lit up during a painful experience. And the interesting thing was, moment to moment, the pain signature, they call it, changed. So a pain signature, a Neuro-Tag, is essentially the orchestration of all these different areas of the brain and the timing and the coordination of how they light up in the moment. So one pinprick compared to the next pinprick compared to the next pinprick, all of those brain scans looked a little bit different. But the one thing that was in common amongst all of these brain scans was the limbic system, or the basal ganglia, the primitive areas that we talked about in the golden circle concept, where our emotions live. So that area of the brain was consistently a part of a painful experience. And remember, this area is more primitive in nature compared to the cerebral cortex, where our logical thoughts are. It is more reflexive in nature. It's a lot faster in terms of the nerve conduction velocities coming from these areas, and it's way better developed and conditioned because it's phylogenetically older than the cerebral cortex. So this area of the brain is responsible for our autonomic response. It's detecting danger, threat. And if there is a conditioned fear to either pain or change, which we know is reflexive in nature, that area of the central nervous system will override any logic or any rationality that exists. So even if we're really good educators and we don't have a way of taming this beast, what the Chinese call the monkey mind, this limbic area of the brain, will literally take over. And this, when I started learning this, I started thinking of all the patients and the clients that I couldn't help, and this was it. This was it. They weren't able to change. I didn't do a good job at acknowledging that aspect of change for them and help find strategic ways to help them move around that. So I think the emotional aspect of the person can be addressed through the intake process, through the one-on-one consults with the patient. And if you're well versed in or know about motivational interviewing, their systems and their strategies are brilliant at helping us navigate this really interesting area of coaching the whole person. Next up, we're going to talk about a story that really highlighted the importance of the emotional aspect of the client in terms of helping them overcome obstacles and overcoming a physical injury. So Rita was a patient who came into the clinic complaining of a high hamstring strain or high hamstring pain every time she went out to run. So to give you a little background about Rita, Rita was an avid runner. She was a mother of 3. She was I want to say she was a nurse at some ICU or acute care, high stress job. And Rita was a very type A personality. Rita was such a sweetheart in the sense that she was willing to do anything you asked her to do to get better. She was so structured in nature. And we initiated the treatment with her using breathing techniques because she was so, let's say, up-regulated. We were trying to down-regulate a high-regulated central nervous system. So we're using a lot of breathing strategies, trying to create intra-abdominal pressure, belly breathing. At the time, I was very much applying DNS and PRI strategies and really trying to get her to access core stability through these methodologies. So a lot of it was on the treatment table. Now, luckily for me, Mike Roberts was overseeing the case, and 2 weeks into treatment, I started getting a little frustrated, and so was she. We weren't really getting anywhere, and I felt like I was repeating a lot of the same things session to session, and her pain wasn't getting any better, wasn't getting any worse, but she was not able to continue running, and she wasn't getting anywhere with her running. So Mike Roberts asked me a couple questions that really switched my thought process with this. He asked me first, he said, well, have you asked her why she loves running so much? I was like, no. Okay, I'll try to ask her that next session. And then number two, he was like, well, have you taken her off the table yet and taken her into the gym and done anything like active with her? I said, nope, maybe I'll try that next time too. So Rita came in the next session, and I started off by asking her a question. I said, Rita, tell me, what is it about running that you love? What is it about running that really gets you going? She paused, she looked at me, and she said, Ramez, that's a really good question. I guess it's when my husband up and left me. So several years back, my husband made a decision to just up and leave. And he left me and my kids behind. And I fell into a very deep depression. And it was hard for me to get out of bed every morning. And one day when I was out doing errands, I saw this lady approaching me. And this lady looked extremely scrawny. She looked like she was skin and bones, essentially. She just didn't look well. And then I realized, oh my God, this is simply a reflection of me in the window of the store. And she was like, it was at that moment that I realized that that's it, Rita, I'm done. Like, I have to change something. So I told myself, tomorrow morning, I'm going to wake up, I'm going to put on my sneakers, and I'm going to go outside, I'm going to go for a run. And ever since that day, running for me has been my escape. Running has been my medicine that helped me overcome that insecurity of my husband leaving me. I sat back and I was like, okay, I hear you. In that moment, I said to myself and Rita, let's get up. We're going to go into the gym. We're going to try a different approach today. So we got into the gym, and my approach became a lot more active in nature. We did core drills that made her feel the burn in her core and her torso. We did different lunges and different deadlift variations that really gave her the aerobic stimulus that she got from running as well, to get her feeling like she's moving and grooving. And from that session moving forward is when we literally started making some level of progress. So we literally decided to just take a step back. I decided, listen, instead of perseverating on this individual's weakness right now, which is the inability to relax and down-regulate, let's play to her strengths. Because in these current circumstances, it may not be a good time for her to learn how to diaphragmatically breathe. It's not necessarily her current preference, and it's not necessarily her personality. So to help combat this emotional disconnect that she's had from running, let's take a different approach. And if it wasn't for those two questions that Mike Roberts asked me, and if it wasn't for me asking Rita this question at the beginning of the session and having a decent understanding of the emotional connection that she had with running, that the injury took her away from, I don't think I would have been able to help Rita. So although I still address the physical aspect of the case, these questions, which is why I'm obsessed with asking questions and the art of asking questions, these questions literally highlighted for me the turning point that needed to happen in my treatment plan. So I hope this story helps to remind you of the importance of at least acknowledging the emotional aspects of the client that we're working with to ultimately help them change and achieve some level of longevity and perseverance. Okay, motor learning and the implications of the intellectual mind and the emotional mind, or the intellectual and emotional aspects of the person. So we talked about the limbic system and we correlated that with the emotional mind. And we talked about the cerebral cortex, rational thoughts, logic. That's our intellectual mind. And if we want to talk about motor learning and the ability for our clients to actually absorb what we're trying to teach them, and the individual is under a high threat perception, in other words, their limbic system is going crazy. If their autonomic nervous system is in this fight or flight mode, then how can we expect them to learn anything? I mean, think of a time when you were extremely pissed off, if you were extremely emotional about something, extremely fatigued, tired, whatever. How ready are you to learn in those states of mind? So we have to at least acknowledge the fact that if we're trying to educate the intellectual mind of the person, yet they're wrapped up in this emotional state, in this scattered state, motor learning is essentially compromised. So this is essentially the concept that is the intersection between the emotional and the intellectual. Right? We can try to train the physical, we can try to teach them and educate them as much as possible, but so as long as we negate this emotional aspect, a lot of different aspects of the whole person is going to be compromised in terms of our treatment plan. So in motor learning literature, this concept is called the inverted U theory. Or in other words, if we are too excited or if we are too low energy, low arousal, performance is going to be compromised, or learning is going to be compromised. So we don't want to be have such low arousal that we're basically sleeping. We also don't want to be so excited and upregulated that we are disorganized and scattered. And that's typical of the emotional mind, or when someone is having a fear response. So we need to acknowledge the fact or understand where our client's state of mind is to make sure that when we introduce a new concept or when we educate about self-care, that they are ready to receive this information. So sometimes if we perceive that this person is just too upregulated, or just maybe they're not a morning person and we're seeing them in the morning, making that executive decision, let's not do anything new today. Let's just stick with what we've been doing, reinforce it, and fine-tune it. It's just as an example. So the interplay between the intellectual and the emotional mind is pretty extensive. Now, let's talk about word choices and in regards to educating the client. And again, this intersection between the emotional and intellectual person. So in the biomedical model, pain is always associated with tissue damage or inflammation and injury. Anytime somebody is hurt, the assumption is, well, something must be going on with the anatomy, with the structure. Arthritis, a tear, something's out of alignment. The science is clearly suggesting that there's other reasons behind someone having pain other than this biomedical explanation. For example, there's a very poor correlation between imaging results and someone experiencing pain or disability. So for example, we have people who are pain-free, expressing very high levels of function, yet their x-rays and their MRIs are showing significant structural changes, that of which we would assume would produce pain, but that's not the case. And then on the other end of the spectrum, we have people who are in pain, actively hurting, yet the x-rays and the MRIs are showing no significant changes. to explain pain. And so these people are typically left thinking it's all in their head. The bottom line here is there's a very poor correlation between imaging results and pain and disability. So we can't utilize imaging for the sole explanation of why someone is hurt anymore. And we sure as heck should not be utilizing words like out of alignment, arthritic. I had someone come to me once that was told by another practitioner that they had the hips of an 80-year-old. We have to recognize that our choice of words can literally create a therapeutic effect or completely play into the conditioning of fear and actually interfere with any type of recovery. I'm remembering right now the model that Limbic, I think his name is, proposed, where when somebody has a pain experience, you can go down two different paths. You can either go down the path of fear conditioning, fear avoidance behavior, and get taken down this rabbit hole in this rat race, I like to call it, or we can use very wise word choices, explain to them using sensitivities and logic and correlating the objective and the subjective history as to why they might be hurting and what type of strategies we may utilize to help them recover. And they're two very different paths if you're familiar with this model. One is that of recovery and one is that of fear conditioning and deconditioning and avoiding movement. So when we are educating the client, the intellectual aspect of the person, we have to acknowledge the emotional state that they're in. Are they ready to learn? Are they not ready to learn? And can we effectively use word choices that promote recovery, empower our clients, instill hope, rather than demoralize them and make them feel as if they're fragile and vulnerable? So that is coaching the whole person. Belief number 2. Next up is belief number 3. We're going to talk about using a positive approach to help someone tap into their potential to change. Thank you guys for listening.